Hi, everyone. Welcome to Happy to See Me, the podcast that puts the spotlight on the overlooked and underestimated. I'm Erika Casupanan, and this week I'm speaking to queer sex educator Eva Bloom. But first, I love to start each episode talking about something I was happy to see this week. And this week, I got to appear on another podcast and talk about something I love, which is BTS. I'm so happy I got to be on the Standing BTS podcast. So thank you to the hosts, Kayla and Bethany, for having me on. I got to talk about how I got into BTS, what it means to me to be an ARMY, and really what BTS means to me. So if you want to hear me wax poetic about the band that everybody knows I love, go check out the episode of the Standing BTS podcast. It is available wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm actually planning an episode to have Kayla and Bethany join me on my show to talk about what it means to be in a fandom and the underestimated parts of being a fan, because I think a lot of the times people might look down on people who are big fans of things. So we are going to break down all of that. So stay tuned for that episode. And if you have any questions or comments about being a fan, send me a DM and let's see if we can get it into the episode. Now, for this episode, this is a very fun and personal episode for me. I am speaking with queer sex educator Eva Bloom. Eva is an award-winning, non-binary, queer sex educator and speaker. Eva has a master's degree in psychology and over 10 years' experience being a sex educator. They have educated over 3 million people around the globe. In this episode, Eva talks about the experience of questioning your sexuality and coming out as an adult, and they're able to answer your questions around being a queer late bloomer. So I will tell you that this episode has more explicit language, so maybe not the episode to listen to around kids. So here is my interview with Eva Bloom. I hope you enjoy it. I feel like you are going to be the answer to so many of my questions and so many of other people's questions. You are an expert in a very particular experience.
It's so funny. I forget that it is like a niche thing to be like, yes, I teach people how to have gay sex and also specifically late bloomers and baby gays.
Thank you for being here. And plus, I think it's honestly such a relief for me where I know that at the end of last year, I told people that I'm a lesbian and it was like amazing and people were so excited. And then I think the thing I didn't anticipate, and this is all positive, is people were so interested and curious about my experience. And I was getting questions all from a good place from people. And I was like, I am still processing this myself. So even though I want to be sharing, I feel like there's a boundary I have to draw for myself right now. So I'm glad that you're here because you can help to address a lot of these questions that people have. Did you have a similar experience when you came out where you were unsure how much you wanted to share initially?
Oh my gosh, totally. I feel like I really like the piece of advice I heard from some content creator or something that like it's good to share stuff when it's maybe not like an immediate wound. If you're like still
Yeah.
bleeding, you're like waiting for it to like form a little scar, and then you'd be like, okay, I'm ready to reflect and share. I know like I processed and like shared a lot from like an educational standpoint, from being like, like here are some statistics. Here are
Yeah.
some general findings, as opposed to like my personal stuff for a while until I felt comfortable to be like, let's share from the personal experience too.
Oh, that's so good to hear because there are sometimes I feel a little, I don't want to say like, I don't know. There are people who tell me, oh, if you ride this later in life lesbian thing, this could be really good for your profile. And I'm thinking, okay, from a business perspective, that's good. But then personally and me, I'm like, I don't know if that's what I want to do. So to hear from someone like you that
Mhm.
it's okay if you can share as you feel comfortable, that is such a relief to me.
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably on the other side of it now where I'm like so cars close to the chest, but like have never been someone who's like, let me share my stream of consciousness with the internet. I'm like, that stuff lasts forever. And my number one responsibility is to myself and my mental health, and the internet is second.
Yes, we love the internet. We love the people that we're able
Mhm.
to connect with because of the internet. And also, I encourage everyone listening, you're also welcome to have a boundary too. You can tell us or you could tell anybody, like, no, I'm not sharing this with you today. And if
Mhm.
they're cool, they're going to respect it.
100%.
So, Eva, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience because you are a queer sex educator. So, what does a queer sex educator do?
Oh my gosh. A queer sex educator gives queer and trans people information about sexuality, bodies, intimacy, dating that most of us never got in high school or like even in adulthood. So yeah, I go and speak at different universities across Canada and the States. I hold different like group programs and community spaces where queer and trans people can get together and learn. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like.
And how did you get into doing this? In particular, how did you get into focusing on the quote unquote late bloomer aspect of queerness?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I have had different journeys, different starting points around becoming a sex educator. In some ways, I've kind of gone full circle because I started initially in high school with founding my high school's gay straight alliance when I thought I was 100% straight.
Didn't we all think we were allies before we came out?
Heterosexual behavior, founding
Yeah.
the gay straight alliance. Also, nobody was like, "Hey, girly, um, you have anything you want to tell us?" They just let me
Yeah.
do that, which was maybe good, but they just let me do that 100% unquestioned. But yeah, as part of the Gay Straight Alliance, I kind of took it upon myself to give like peer-to-peer sex ed lessons in the meetings. So it's very wild that I started doing queer sex ed in that way, and then I kind of restarted it in university doing sex ed more generally on YouTube and stuff because I learned a lot about sex ed from YouTube because where else are we getting it? And I really was inspired by learning about sex research that I was studying in school and just learning a lot in my early 20s in general. And I'm like, I want to share that with the people. And then eventually, as I like learned more about myself and realized that I was queer, the kind of sex ed content that I was giving became more clear towards the queer community. And similarly, when I recame out as a lesbian and kind of was looking for late bloomer community, that's when the niche and the education went that way too.
So, wait, you were doing queer sex ed when you still believed that you were straight?
Yes, fully 16, fully 16. It's also like, I guess I don't realize that like a gay straight alliance can be many things. It does not need to be sex ed, but since the little baby Eva has always been incredibly interested in sex ed. I was watching One Girl, Five Gays on MTV religiously.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what is about this, about these candid conversations about queer sexuality and my little straight self that I'm drawn to. But yeah, it's been a full circle moment.
It's funny looking back and realizing those signs because I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I also related to always consuming queer content when I was younger and when I believed I was straight, and I thought it was purely out of allyship, but I guess it's like a shared experience."
So much so. I don't know whether you were part of like the 2010s like lesbian like YouTuber era. I was right in there. I was watching Rose and Rosie. Let's you Yeah, yeah. Strong ally. Fierce ally behavior. I feel drawn to these creators for no other reason.
And can I ask, how old are you now?
I am 28.
Okay, and can I also ask,
Mhm.
how old were you when you came out?
So I have come out like 3, 4 times. I came out for the first time in 2018. So I don't know how time works. I was like 22 initially as bisexual. And that whole coming out story, very wild, involves a sex conference, involves a hotel threesome. I've told it on other podcasts, I'll tell it again. But yeah, that was also very wild where I was like having crushes forever. And then it got to the point where it was like, babes, you like this girl romantically. And I was like, okay, I like one girl. And that's it.
Well, you've had this history that I think a lot of people have had where
Mhm,
if you look back, you
mhm.
realize, okay, maybe the signs were there, but I didn't realize it in the moment. So, when it comes to people who are realizing their sexuality when they're adults or quote unquote later in life, and I hate the term later in life, it doesn't matter how old we are, but what are potentially some of the factors that might prevent someone from realizing their sexuality until they're in adulthood?
I'll finish the timeline. I came out again as a lesbian and non binary in 2021 when I was 26. But yeah, I agree. The term like later in life, most of us, especially if you're like millennial, we saw barely any queer people on TV. Like, we got no representation. It makes sense that it took us a while to see that we could be queer and that there's so many different, queer looks like so many different things. Like, that could be us, that wasn't a bad thing. But yeah, different signs. Oh my gosh. I had so many moments of girls that I was just like obsessed with for
Hmm.
reasons I couldn't name or fathom. Like I had a French exchange student like come to my high school and I was like giving her the lay of the land and I was like, that girl, by the way, is so hot. She's so cool. She's the prettiest girl in school. My French exchange student is like, I don't think that that's an objective fact. I think that maybe you just think that she's the prettiest, hottest girl in school. And I was like, what? Crazy.
I can totally relate because I spent so many years thinking, oh, don't we all just agree that women are objectively prettier and more attractive? Like, we all know that. That's just a fact, right? Turns out that that's not a fact to everybody.
So wild. Also, the more I've become comfortable with my lesbianism and like truly understand, I'm like, oh, like all these people who are like dating these like men with beards, they all think that he's attractive. They're actually like, I know. Yeah, I don't know. The dots that did not click for me. I think it's the thing where it's like, oh, that's just what you do. And I'm like, I guess that would just be what I would do versus like picturing myself being with like a woman or a binary person. I'm like, oh, like attraction. There's like a level of
Yeah.
enthusiasm and like a sensation in my body that is not there when I think about being with a man.
Yeah. Would you say that it wasn't really modeled for you? And I guess in general, it's not normally modeled for people, that there are other options besides just the man with the beard.
Totally. Especially, I think growing up in the early 2000s, there was still a lot of homophobia that to be a lesbian was like a joke. There's like Ellen DeGeneres is like, haha,
Hmm.
funny, like lesbian, or like Rosie O'Donnell, like, haha, funny, like lesbian. And I would say there's also like our society has all sorts of like thoughts around like women expressing masculinity and like fat women that are also tied into like treating people like Rosie O'Donnell like a joke. I was like, "Oh, a lesbian is not a good thing. Like, a lesbian life is not a full life. It's not a life that I can picture or, like, I see people who look like me living." I feel like it wasn't until even, like, TikTok, just seeing, like, such a huge
Hmm.
rush of, like, lesbians being beautiful and cool and like having relationships and I'm like we we need it to be romanticized. Like we need to make up for all of these like many years of lesbian and like sapphic and queer representation not being seen as something that is beautiful and good.
I know other friends who have also come out, quote
Mhm.
unquote, later in life, and we're all just like, oh, you got on lesbian TikTok too? Okay, cool. Like, it's now become the 2020s
Yeah.
rite of passage for people.
The people at the TikTok headquarters, I don't think that they were intentionally creating a generation of sapphics, but that's what they did.
When I think back, growing up, I didn't really remember seeing a lot of lesbians in movies or anything. The ones, like you said, Rosie O'Donnell or Ellen DeGeneres, it's like they were shown almost like in isolation where they're just supposed to be
Mhm.
chummy and funny, even though I guess we knew that Ellen and Portia were always in a long term relationship, but you never really got to see the romance or the love or anything. They were always just kind of like there in
Mhm.
comedic relief. So it is nice that now with things like TikTok and, of course, like with more culture that's evolving, we get to see lesbians in other ways and potentially see
Yeah,
ourselves in them.
100%. I'm ready for a deep dive into, like, what it would mean to have had Portia as, like, a femme, beautiful lesbian, like, get to have her story told a little bit more and, like, the impact that would have had on so many people. We'll never know.
So many more out
Yes,
lesbians.
5,000,000,000%.
So something that I learned on lesbian TikTok, which just like totally blew my mind and I think was a big turning point for me, was the concept
Mhm.
of comphet. So can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so comphet is it's short for compulsory heterosexuality, which is the idea that when you are born, you come into the world, and the world says, "Hey, you're gonna be straight." And it sets up all these different markers that says straight is assumed, and we're going to kind of like enforce straightness on you. We're going to penalize you if that's not what your journey or your experience is. From the little like baby clothes that say like lady killer that they give to boys, like what
Oh, it's terrible.
it's terrible. And then all the movies that we watched growing up, like I feel like people talk about all the time, like it's time for a queer Disney princess. But it's true. We like, especially for kids who grew up in the early 2000s, okay, we're like fed that that's what the life journey is. All of these like cultural narratives around even like marriage, and especially for women and people who aren't men, like women and non-binary people, the idea that your wedding day should be the happiest day in your life. And all of these images of weddings and marriage is of a man and a woman. And this idea that your value kind of implicitly taught throughout society that like your value as a woman should be in like getting married to a man, having a boyfriend, and like having kids. So for a lot of women, I feel like we navigate coming into our queerness differently in this kind of context. We're like, okay, in order to be a good woman, I have to be straight. And so we like block out all of the like signs of our queerness and can, by simply like not realizing that it's an option, it can become harder to realize that we're queer.
That's such a great way to put it, where you just don't even realize that it's an option.
Mhm.
I think back to so many thoughts where I'm like, oh, as I said before, when I thought, oh, doesn't everybody think that women are more beautiful? I also thought, oh, doesn't everyone think it would be cool to have a girlfriend, but I'm just going to marry a man anyways. So what's the point? I'm like, wait, not everybody thinks that, but I just thought that that wasn't an option.
1,000,000,000%, 1,000,000,000%. Yeah, in relationships with men, I was like, of course, I mean, I'm gonna wanna have sex with a woman at some point in my life, but, like, that's just and I feel like there's a weird, like, misogyny and, like, fetishization and devaluing of women's sexuality, where it's like, "Oh, like, women are just, like, sexually fluid," like, the whole, like, early 2000s of, like, I don't know, it's, like, cool and sexy to, like, make out with your friends, but that's all about, like, for the male gaze and not actually about a person's own queerness and identity. I feel like that definitely was a lot of messaging for me where it's like, "Women are just more sexually fluid. It's okay if I, like, wanna fuck my friends. That doesn't mean that I'm queer." To anybody listening here, if this resonates with you, you got this. If you wanna take some time to journal, being sexually attracted to women or like being sexually attracted to queer people is queer enough. And like it is an option to mean that you are queer and that you can claim that label.
Later in the podcast, we're going to answer some questions from listeners, but a theme that comes up a lot is people wondering if they're queer enough. And we'll hear it later in the episode, but what advice do you have for people who might not feel like they're queer enough? And even where does the idea that you're not queer enough come from?
Well, I feel like for a lot of like women and non binary people who, yeah, like grew up in this like soup of like the ultimate lesbian is like Ellen. If I don't look like Ellen, then like I can't call myself queer. If you don't see representation of what your queerness looks like, you can feel like, oh, then that's not a label for me. I mean, we're getting better in terms of like femme representation or even like queer, trans, like BIPOC representation. And I feel like also very like monosexual. Historically, it's been like the queer community is like gay and lesbian people. So people who are like, I'm bi or I'm pan or I'm queer. Being like, am I not allowed in the club? Is this not queer enough? And it's like, yeah, the LGBTQ plus community. There are more bi people than there are gays and lesbians combined. Like, you are welcome here. You're queer enough.
That's the thing. And everything is so fluid and changing that it's like everyone's level of queerness changes from day to day, and any amount of queerness is legitimate.
Yeah, I feel very much like solidarity and like casting the net wide. We are stronger together. And we are so want you to be here and in the community.
Yes, yes. I want to go back to talking about potential
Mhm.
signs that people missed, because I know you've spent years now working as a queer sex educator and you've met so many people. So, what are some other common signs that a lot of people might have missed?
one that a lot of people bring up was like choosing an arbitrary crush, whether that is like in middle
Mm.
school to be like, okay, part of girl talk is sharing crushes and being like, uh, Matt S. I guess that's the one that's cute. I remember it was like Harry Potter and somebody had already said Daniel Radcliffe and I was like, well, you took mine. That was gonna be my arbitrary guy crush.
I feel like another one for me was I guess I always would hang around with women and then they talk about how all men suck or the challenges of having a male partner who is not willing to open up emotionally. So I think I also just thought, oh, no one is supposed to be happy with men. So of course, of course I don't need to be either, you know?
Oh my gosh. Huge. Huge. This like normalization that like straight relationships are something to be endured and that like even
Hmm.
this like idea that like oh straight sex isn't great or like oh like women who have sex with men like aren't always having orgasms like that's like normal and okay. So if you're a lesbian then you're like oh I guess I guess it's fine that I'm like not
Hmm.
enjoying sex or like not enjoying relationships. I feel hopeful and powerful that, like, as relationships get better for everybody, for, like, straight
Yeah.
women and, like, queer people, that hopefully that'll mean better outcomes for us all, change the narrative. You're like a little lesbian growing up. You're like, "Oh, all my friends are enjoying sex and relationship with their boyfriend, and I'm not. Maybe maybe we can take a look at that."
Yeah. So I've also seen you say that when you came out, you experienced a lot of joy and lightness, and you experienced other feelings. So can you describe some of the common, often confusing feelings that people would experience when they come out?
Yeah, I feel like whew, coming out is like a transition in life and like a reinvention. And I feel like even though there's a lot of joy with any type of transition, there's a lot of confusion. It can feel like a loss, like you're grieving a loss of like your former life or like expectations that you previously had for yourself, whether that's like even expectations that your family had for you. It can be like a time of grief and sadness in that way. And I think can also be a time of confusion. Like it's exciting to be like, oh, being my authentic self, we're gonna blaze a new trail. And you're like, blazing a new trail is overwhelming. I don't know what's
Yes.
coming up next on the trail. Before the plan was to have a boyfriend and get married and have kids, and now I'm like, I don't know. How do I hit on a pretty girl? We're back to step one, I guess.
I know that having to relearn how to do everything, it's like, oh, okay. But this is just a step I will take to be happy for the rest of my life. So I guess we have to do it.
For late bloomers, it can be dis like there can be a disconnect with friends who are your same age, but like at a different life stage than you, or like maybe having kids, like buying houses, like having been in long-term partnership for many, many years. And you're like, I have a whole different set of like problems, like lifestyle. I'm at such a different stage. And I feel like for a lot of people, it can feel lonely, especially at the beginning before if you like feel like you haven't had queer community since coming out. And then you're kind of like, okay, so we got to find the queer community now. So yeah, I feel like loneliness can be a part of that navigating too. Even with other queer people, I feel like being right at the beginning of your journey or being a late bloomer is such a unique experience that you can feel isolated from queer people who've been out for a long time too. So it can feel like double-sided loneliness in that way.
Yeah, I think that people underestimate how much it can affect your relationships, even if everybody is in support.
Mhm,
Even if everyone is like, yes, yes, good for you. You do feel that shift in relationships, right? Like
mhm,
I remember for me, I started to gravitate more towards my queer friends and especially my queer friends who came out in adulthood. And even though so many of my hetero friends were so supportive, it was almost like, you know, that TikTok sound, "I need to speak to a gay person." I was just like, "Oh, love all of you,
mhm.
but I just need to be around these people right now to manage what I'm going through."
100%. I feel like the first time I think it was at, like, my birthday party, like, 2 weeks after I'd re-come out as a lesbian, and I had a group of several of my late bloomer lesbian friends all together, And it felt like I was like drinking water after being in a desert. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
like people who get it. Like I especially I feel like in those first like few months or years after you've come out, when you're like detoxing all that internalized homophobia, like really wanting to like feel connected and authentic, like having that queer community is like so oh yeah. I just want to hang out with queer people.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. It's like the detoxing of everything, having to leave your body because, yeah, there's so much grief. I remember what I experienced, and actually, an episode I did with my friend Evie, who was on Survivor with me. It's episode 31, where they talked about coming out again and again and again, where you almost feel a sense of grief towards yourself, too, where you're like, how did I allow myself to suppress myself and to live in a way that wasn't true to me for so long?
Mhm.
And then you have to go on this journey of almost like self-forgiveness to get through it.
Yeah, 100%.
So when people come out as late bloomers, what are some of the common insecurities that they're facing?
Community, am I queer enough, and intimacy. Wondering, am I queer enough really ties into like feeling like, am I welcome in those community spaces? I think that really reaffirming to the am I queer enough that it's okay to not be 100% sure before you dive in. I know that I was, like, experimenting with the label lesbian, like, on my close friend stories, like, sharing lesbian memes for probably, like, 6 months to a year before I came out publicly. Like, you don't have to have all the answers before you claim a queer label or, like, start exploring spaces, and I feel like that's the same with intimacy and dating. I feel like there's been a discourse of, like, you need to disclose if it's your first time, like, with a woman or, like, if you're new to queer dating. But there's so many other parts of who we are other than our, like, dating history or, like, how new or old we are to queer dating that I don't think it really matters that much. I think even if you are, like, new to queer dating, we all have different, like, dating histories. Maybe you've had a bunch of dating experience, but it's all been bad. Maybe you haven't had any dating experiences, but you have a lot of long, like, meaningful, like, friendships throughout your life. I would say, like, that is relational experience. So, I'm very much encouraging people to feel like you don't have to make a big deal with the new people you're dating. You can, like, explore and learn things with them. Gay sex is not that hard. It's okay to wanna learn and get information, that's what I'm all about, but it's also not that hard. It is more intuitive than you think. Genitals are not that different. If you experience with one set of genitals, there's a lot you can apply, there's a lot of transferable skills, you got this.
Nothing is set in stone, right? Everything can change. I remember I was speaking to a friend who has been out as a lesbian since she was in high school. And I was telling her, I am pretty sure I'm a lesbian, but I'm afraid if I say that, then it's like I've reached a point of no return and I can never date a man ever again. And she said to me, you can call yourself a
Mhm.
lesbian. And if you decide that you want to date a man in the future, like it literally doesn't matter. Like, you can call yourself whatever you want and you can date whoever you want. And I was like, "Oh, thank you." That, like, relieved so much pressure. Although, sorry, men, I don't think it's gonna happen.
I feel that 100%. I think in between the, like, 5 or, like, 4 years from being bi to being a lesbian, I was like, "Yeah, I'll, like, open myself up to opportunities." I was like, "Oh, I'm, like, not feeling drawn to any men. There's no men that I feel compelled to date." And I'm like, "Yeah, let's for 4 years, that's not been the case. Let's explore the label lesbian. If that changes, we'll change it back." But I feel very similarly. I'm like, we gave the chance for the mythical man to appear, and if he still does, but that's not gonna stop me from, like, embracing myself and who I am.
That's true. We gave them a chance, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, they had their shot, and, women are just more beautiful, sorry.
Alright, I wanna get into some of these listener questions. So some of them are questions, some of them are more so statements where people are just in situations where they need advice. So let's jump into it. The first few are around coming out to family. So the first one is, I'm a trans woman and I need help coming out to parents and family who might not support me.
I feel like coming out advice, like, people asking for advice, it hits me so much in the heart because it's such a vulnerable spot, such an emotional spot, like such a big transition. And I feel like I'm going to say what a lot of people say, which is to really prioritize yourself and your safety, especially if you don't know whether or not your family is going to be accepting. Like, prioritize that you have, I don't know, a place to stay, like, you have money, like, you have material safety. And I will also say, like, this idea of needing to have like one big coming out to the world, or like that you need to come out to family, is not a mandatory queer experience. You are queer enough, like you are valid in whatever identity you have, and you can never come out to your family. Like, that is a call that you make for yourself. And you get to decide like who you're inviting into your identity in your world and what would make you feel good and celebrated. That's kind of that's it. I wish I had more like, so you do XYZ steps, but I think it really is like super individual.
That's the thing. It's so individual. And
Hmm.
there were other questions around managing reactions from family members. So, family members who might not be supportive, or maybe they're not necessarily positive or negative, but it's kind of somewhere in between. So, how can someone kind of manage that and also protect their own heart in those situations?
That was definitely my experience. I think most people's experience of being somewhere in the middle. And I think what a lot of people will say is like, have patience and know that time will, in a lot of cases, time will help family understand you. Maybe they'll take time to learn more about the queer community, and acceptance and like understanding will come through that way. I think also just like finding the people who do make you feel seen and celebrated and leaning on that, whether that's like friends or community spaces. It's so heartbreaking to be like releasing yourself a little bit from how the world might perceive you or how your family might perceive you. Because people are going to maybe have lots of different thoughts about who you are and your queerness. That is not as important as like how you feel about yourself. So, as much as you can, being like, I can separate that from me knowing that this is the right path for me. And like, I have all these friends that celebrate me, and they're going to be on their own separate acceptance and understanding journey, hopefully.
Yes, it's important for you to make sure that you keep yourself number one. And I love how you said
Mhm.
that they have to be on their own acceptance journey, because it's true. It's like that is their own journey. You're not responsible for that. You just
Hmm.
have to do what's
Yeah.
right for you, and you have to let them process it in the time it's going to take. But love yourself. So I know that there were other questions around coming out to different family members, coming out to kids. So we are going to link some resources that Eva is going to share in the show notes. So make sure you check those out if you have more specific questions. Next, there are a lot of questions that I think are tied to the theme of feeling like you're queer enough or feeling like you're legitimate within the community. So one was, I think I'm queer, but I'm shy and I haven't been with a woman.
Ah, I feel like those are like so many people in my community who are like, hello, what do I do? And I'm like, you got this. Um, I would say that thinking that you're queer and like feeling shy, there are so many different ways to like engage in the queer community and learn more and like feel valid and start like affirming yourself in really small ways, like you can do from your house. I know that like when I first came out, I kind of went on a big journey to like watch a bunch of queer movies. And I continue to like love queer books and like reading queer narratives. And I feel like that has been really affirming for me to see that queerness can be a beautiful thing, that there's so many different lives that you can lead as a queer person. So I think that could be a place to start if you're feeling shy around like going to community or like starting to date and just like starting to build that self confidence. I really like the books Cool for the Summer. I feel like it's a really great coming out questioning book. That Summer Feeling, both both
We need a
summer
summer vibe right now.
romances. Yeah, I like When You Least Expect It is also a good one. That's like more like late bloomer. Yeah, and I would say too, like again, when it comes to like queer dating, you don't have to have all of the answers figured out to like start messaging people on dating apps or just like going and being a queer community. You don't have to put any expectations, but you can just be there and learn and kind of be patient for the progress, and like that confidence like will come.
For sure. Any amount of queerness that you are is legitimate. You don't need anybody else to validate it for you. It's not like having a partner validates that you are queer or not.
Mhm.
Whatever you are, that is enough. So go for it.
Yeah, if you experience romantic and or sexual attraction, if you got little crushes, if you think queer people are hot, that's it. There's no queer checklist.
So another statement is from somebody who said that they felt pressure to come out as gay when they were young, but now as an adult, they want to consider how to be queer slash bi or pan. So how can they go about the confusing feelings around that?
Aw. I mean, that I will wanna send so much compassion, and I'm also, like, so excited for this person to be learning more about themselves, and I think this makes a lot of sense, like we talked about earlier. In the early 2000s, there was such a, like, monosexual focus of either you are a lesbian or you're gay, and, like, less conversations around bi and pan and queer identities. So I think it makes a lot of sense as, like, we're having more representation of bi, queer, pan like identities that you're like, "Oh, like, that's what resonates with me." So, I would absolutely, like, find whether there's, like, bi and pan groups, and I can send Erica some resources on these 2 to put in the show notes, whether that's, like, people on social media to follow who are bi or pan. But I think with all types of queer identities, there's no like we were saying, there's no one right path,
Yeah.
one right way to be bi or pan. I feel like there might be more stereotypes around, like, bi or pan people maybe being more sexual, more, like,
Hmm.
flirty. You're like, maybe that's your vibe, but also maybe that's not your vibe. Like, you don't need to change anything about who you are now that you've, like, understood your identity in, like, this kind of shifting the language or understanding yourself better. You're still you.
Exactly. Labels can change. It's okay. The person can evolve because people evolve. But
Mhm.
if the label changes, who cares? Be attracted to who you're attracted to.
Yeah, keep doing you. You're absolutely crushing it. Erica and I, Erica maybe know you because she asked the questions, but I don't know you. But I think from no information, I think you're absolutely crushing it.
There you go. The approval from Eva. So, one more. This is another statement in which people need some guidance, and it's I'm pansexual in a hetero presenting relationship, and I'm having a hard time making space for my queerness.
This is also probably one of the most frequently asked questions that I get because, yeah, there are so many bisexuals and pansexual. Like I said, more than lesbian and queer people, more than lesbian and gay people. There are like many different elements to queerness that are not just like having sex or like the relationship that you're in. Like embodying queerness and like living your queerness can look a lot of different ways, whether that is like building queer friendships, like going into queer spaces, learning about queer history, engaging in queer culture. So I think nurturing all of those things can maybe be ways that you like feel more affirmed in your queer and like bi identity.
It's so true. Yeah, it's not just the relationship with a person of the same sex, it's so many other things.
Mhm.
And yeah, love them all.
Yeah. Oh, expression too. Hair, makeup, like clothes, that can also be a way that like you can signal to your queerness or like explore too.
I love all of it. Eva, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with everybody. Now, as a queer sex educator, what are the types of resources or services that you have for people who might want some more support in terms of their late bloomer journey?
Yeah, I offer a bunch of different community spaces. I run a virtual community space called the Fuck Comphet Support Club, which is for late bloomers, baby queers, people who just want to like dive into their queerness a little bit more. And we meet once a month on the last Monday of every month at 8 p.m. EST on Zoom. We have a cute little Discord. So that's something that I offer. Also have a sex ed for late bloomers masterclass if like sex and intimacy is something you're particularly want to dive into. But yeah, you can follow me also on Instagram at What's My Body Doing for all sorts of tips, resources, book recommendations, sex tips, all of it.
And it's honestly such an informative Instagram account. I think I'm always looking at stuff and I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool that someone was able to articulate a weird feeling I had. So I highly recommend giving Eva a follow.
The highest compliment. I love to be able to articulate weird feelings that we have.
Eva, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been the best.
Thank you so much, Eva, for all of your advice. And Eva is going to send me more resources, so make sure you check out the show notes so you can learn more about coming out to your family and coming out as an adult. Now, I love to end each episode by answering a question. And this week, I've been kind of in a reflective mood. So right now, at the time of recording, it is the first week of March, and I'm thinking about all of the milestones that happened in and around March over the last couple years. So a year ago was when I froze my eggs. And I recently got together with one of my friends who was my producer when I was at Entertainment Tonight Canada. And we realized 2 years ago was when I started my contract at Entertainment Tonight Canada. And then filming Survivor, I remember being out in Fiji in March 2021. So that was what, 3 years ago? I was out in Fiji filming Survivor. And then March 2020, of course, the pandemic. But then also that's when I thought I was going to go out and film Survivor for the first time. So that was 4 years ago. And I was thinking, okay, what is advice I would give to myself 5 years ago, which was March 2019? And I can't even remember where I was at that time. I think that I was working at my corporate communications job, probably working out, probably hoping to find another vacation or something to do, and trying to figure out how I could make myself feel something or have some type of relief or some type of goal to break up the monotony I had found myself in terms of the job that I was in and the life that I was in. And even after listening to the interview that I had with Eva, thinking that I was straight and thinking that I wanted to be with a man. I don't really want to give that version of me advice because I feel like that would screw up the space-time continuum or something. But I guess if I had something to say to that version of me, I would tell her that it all works out even better than you expected it. And I know I'm in a fortunate position that I got to go on my favorite show, and then winning that show helped me to really change my life in ways that I didn't really expect. But then I think about how I was unsure about where I wanted to go in my job, and even just thinking about not really knowing the direction that I wanted to go in, but then going through the pandemic, going through reality TV, going through all the changes that I've gone through, I really left myself room to figure out what I wanted to do. If I had to tell that version of me anything, I would tell her that everything does work out. And also, the stuff that you thought you were worried about doesn't really matter. Think about what you were stressed out about 5 years ago. I'm sure that there were totally, legitimately big, consequential things. But then I think about, I don't know, like relationships I cried over. Now I'm like, who cares? Or work conflicts and frustrations. I'm like, whatever, that's all behind me now. And even things like wanting to set fitness goals and wanting to make certain changes to my body. My body has achieved a lot. My body has gotten me through so many life experiences. Like, who cares? So I think that the advice that I would give to my older self is that everything works out. But then I realized that is advice that I can also give to my current self and potentially you, the listener, your current self too. If you think about how far you've come over the last few years and how little worries from before ended up being very little, and you think about how you were blessed with so many things since then, maybe it's a reminder to you that everything's going to work out even better than you thought it would. So yeah, that is my advice to old me, current me, and to current you. It's all going to work out for the best. And I know that it has worked out because you have been listening to this podcast. So thank you so much for spending time with me this week. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast and share this episode with someone who you think would love to hear about queer late bloomers. And I will be happy to see you next Monday.